I'm just gonna get settled in.
I'm sure you've been seeing those memes going around of how back in the day we were getting a brand new game from Rockstar pretty much every single year. From 2001 to 2013 we got GTA games, Manhunt, Bully, The Warriors, Midnight Club games, Red Dead Redemption, LA Noire, table tennis, and of course the Max Payne series. I played the first one like a year ago, which wasn't actually developed by Rockstar, being developed by Remedy, which I played that one on my PlayStation 5, which turned out to be a broken ass port from Rockstar, but I overall had a blast with the game. I then went out and bought The Fall of Max Payne a few months ago, played through it, enjoyed it a lot, and after I beat that game, I was kind of surprised that there was a third Max Payne game, because I for sure thought that the series ended after 2 because of how that game ended and how great it was. Now, Max Payne 3 is a very interesting game. This game is kind of like The Last of Us 2. It's a very divisive title that has been surrounded in controversy since it came out in 2012. I of course have no memory of that because I was 5 years old, but I've heard from many diehard fans of the Max Payne franchise say that Max Payne 3 is the worst game in the series, which piqued my interest to try the game out to see if it's really that bad like people say, because in my opinion, I don't think there's truly ever been a bad Rockstar game. So in this video, ladies, we're going to be covering Max Payne 3 with hopefully a very unbiased opinion. Alright, so it's 2001, and Remedy releases the first game that they're remembered for, Max Payne 1, having the game set in the gritty, rundown streets of New York City. When Max Payne 1 dropped, it took storytelling to a whole nother level. The game differentiated itself by not having any cutscenes, but instead featuring graphic novels throughout the game while Max narrates over it. Not many game studios do this because it's kind of a risky thing to do because it may feel like a very cheap way to not make hand-animated cutscenes, but when Remedy did this, it gave Max Payne 1 its own unique style that no other game did. Long story short, the game became one of the best third-person shooter games of its time for its epic bullet time feature. This element of the game was a super unique mechanic in a third-person shooter game. It took its cinematics and mashed it to its combat, creating these epic slow-motion action shots. The way they executed was to incorporate into each of the levels to basically complement the mechanic. Like for example, when you walk through a door and turn a corner, the game is giving you the perfect opportunity to shoot your weapon like you're in a John Woo movie. The game now, of course, is janky as hell. Like, I couldn't find a way to turn on aim assist, which usually I leave off when I play games, but this game's free aim is atrocious. I also think it's funny and kind of cool how they didn't make like an actual face for Max Payne, and instead they just rendered Sam Lake's face onto him. It looks cool and very uncanny to me sometimes, but I'd say the main thing that has aged well about this game is the story and the atmosphere, which for a game that came out in 2001, that's pretty good.
Alex and BB were my only contacts in the DEA, the only ones in this decrepit city who knew I was down here.
And then 2 years later, in 2003, The Fall of Max Payne drops. Now, Max Payne 2 keeps the same elements that made the first game so good, but they just did it better. This game captures that depressing mood of Max Payne so well in terms of the soundtrack and how dark, rainy, and gray everything is during the graphic novels. It's much more of a show and don't tell kind of game. It also has a much better sense of progression as you complete certain levels, which do get harder the more you continue in the game, but it feels like you're actually accomplishing things than just mindlessly slogging through it. I also forgot to mention, but I also want to give props to the voice acting in this game. Not saying that the first game's acting wasn't good, because it definitely was, but something with how these characters express their emotions without us actually seeing it, but we can feel it, is just so cool in my opinion. Overall, I like the game. I like the cinematics, the story, the characters, all of that. And from a fan perspective of this series, we got 2 amazing games that all capture their setting beautifully. And Max Payne 2, in my opinion, seemed like to be a really nice close ending to the franchise. Everything that the first game opened was pretty much closed in the second game. And as years dragged on, and as Remedy and Rockstar continued to release their own games, with no other hints of a new Max Payne game, it seemed like that they pretty much just moved on. Alright, so 8 years later, in 2011, Rockstar announces that a brand new Max Payne game was in development, and it was going to be a little bit different this time around. For starters, this game was going to be fully developed by Rockstar instead of Remedy, and it was going to be written by Dan Houser instead of Sam Lake. And almost immediately when this announcement was made public, a lot of people were skeptical, because putting a beloved game in the hands of a completely different company is always a risky thing to do. And also, in my opinion, there didn't need to be a third game. So it was going to be very interesting on how Rockstar was going to go about it. So the game comes out a year later in 2012, and the sequel to Max Payne 2 is officially available for the public to play. And I know what the popular opinion for this game is, and I of course have my own criticisms for it, but don't get it mistaken, I very much do and enjoy this game. Sometimes. I typically enjoy any game from Rockstar, and of course with any game I talk about, it's gonna have its flaws, and Max Payne 3 has a lot of them. So I'll start off with what I liked about the game. Bullet time and the movement in this game is marginally better. You can really tell that Rockstar were trying their best to lean more into that realistic approach, which I know some people don't like when the basic mechanics of a game feel heavy, but it feels so good when I do the bullet time shots that I can feel the weight of Max leaping into the air. And this game's gunplay is very impressive for a game that came out 12 years ago. And the funny thing is that this game's gunplay was so good for its time that it became a huge influence for some of Rockstar's later titles like Red Dead Redemption 2. Just the jump from Max Payne 2's gunplay to 3, which was about a 9-year gap, was big. Every kill you get, every cinematic kill you get feels unique and different. Makes you feel like a total badass. As in the original Max Payne, the kill shots were almost the exact same. I also have to give props to Rockstar for the setting of this game, having the game take place in Brazil rather than the gritty streets of New York City. When the game came out, a lot of people did not like this and felt like it didn't fit the theme of Max Payne, which, to be fair, I do see where a lot of people are coming from. I mean, the first 2 games in the series took place in New York City, and like a lot of other people, I am a huge fan of that gray, dingy atmosphere in games like Grand Theft Auto 4, Gears of War, and just any game that came out in the 2000s. But I do like how they did it because they incorporated these run-down, dangerous slum areas of Brazil that are quite exaggerated, where gangs roam the street and kill innocent people in broad daylight. Like in Chapter 6, when the game introduces you to Brazil for the first time, you almost feel like this is a really nice, happy place, because before you spend a little bit of time in gloomy New York City, and then you're randomly thrown into this sunny, colorful place. I thought that too, but then like 5 minutes later that quickly changes when Max gets robbed at gunpoint by local gang members, and realizes how mean and messed up everyone here is. And I don't think this should be a surprise, but there was some controversy for how Rockstar portrayed and stereotyped Brazilian people in this game. Like, from what I've looked up, there's certain towns in this game like Favela and Sao Paulo that are generally portrayed as crappy places with Brazilians carrying guns and murdering people in cold blood. And obviously, I'm not Brazilian, but I do know what a lot of people who are Brazilian are talking about, because the game was written by Dan Houser, who is from London, and him and the writing team probably just watched a bunch of Brazilian movies that got a completely different perspective of the actual place. Now, they did have Brazilian actors for the game, which I have to respect, because if Rockstar tried to have non-Brazilian people speaking Portuguese, that would just not fly well. Alright, we're not trying to have this be like Assassin's Creed Unity where French people have British accents, but it shouldn't be a surprise that a AAA company is gonna exaggerate the crap out of a different country's culture for entertainment purposes. I mean, that's the whole point, right? Make it entertaining and thrilling for the player. But despite those little things, I do really like this part of the game. I love walking through the dark, rundown, narrow alleyways and witnessing chaos. And it is one of the very few times where Rockstar has depicted a different country, the previous one being Mexico from the first Red Dead Redemption. Now, however, with all of those things of the game that I liked, there is one big thing that this game really drops the ball on, and that is the gameplay. Or I should say the gameplay loop. The entire loop of this game is boring as hell to me, in my opinion. I understand that this is a third-person shooter game. The entire point of the game is shooting bad guys, but I feel like just the way they did it makes it such a slog to get through. All you do in this game is go through cutscenes, just shoot some bad guys, and that's it. Nothing more, nothing else. It does have some decent set pieces, but it doesn't make up for the boringness for me. And don't get me wrong, it was fun for like the first few hours, but not for 10 plus hours. I feel like because Max Payne 3 is such a linear story-driven game, it's pretty hard to include other activities besides just shootouts. And quickly speaking about the actual shootouts, a good portion of them aren't really even that interesting to me. In the earlier Max Payne games, there were like 4 enemies at a time that you had to kill. In the beginning of the first game, you had to kill some enemies in your house, which kept the game fresh for me. However, in Max Payne 3, most of the shootouts just take place in these big ass open spaces with like 30 enemies at a time. Most of these happen because Max for some reason always ends up walking into an ambush and has to defend himself, which got old pretty fast. And this also has to do with the non-stop cutscenes in this game. My goodness, Rockstar really took having cutscenes appear every 30 seconds to new heights in this game. And the way it's done isn't even clever, it's just like so annoying. For example, I'll be talking to someone, which is a cutscene, so I have to sit through that. And after that cutscene ends, the game lets me play for a second, which my gameplay is me walking from one end of the hallway to the other. And then once you get to the end of the hallway and open the door, you trigger a cutscene. And then you have a shootout. Rinse and repeat. Like, what was the point of having that cutscene? Is let me open the door and let me just shoot bad guys immediately. Like, when I started getting a groove and getting a decent flow with the game, these cutscenes just completely ruin it and take me out of the game immediately. They happen at so many inconvenient times it feels so out of place sometimes. It just makes nothing about this game feel seamless because of all these breakages in the game. For me personally, I think that this is one of this game's biggest downsides. Rockstar completely restricts you, makes the game feel more of a passive experience than active. As in, I could watch Max Payne 3 cutscenes on YouTube and it would still have the same effect on me as if I was playing the game. Also, did anyone else get frustrated by how long these cutscenes last? I mean, my goodness, some of them last like 7 minutes long. And with all of these useless cutscenes that happen, it makes the game not replayable in the slightest, which many people have stated. So why is this game so different than the previous ones? Well, the obvious one is that this game was developed by Rockstar instead of Remedy. Remedy did it so much differently in the first two games, in my opinion, so much better. From the graphic novels with Max narrating over it, they happened at the right times and the way they did it for those two games suited them right. As I'm not really upset that they didn't include that in Max Payne 3, because by 2012 Rockstar Games and just a bunch of game companies were shifting more into motion capture, which did pay off well because some of these cutscenes do look fantastic, graphically, cinematically, but the way they went about it really did cost the game in terms of replayability. It takes so much control away from the player that it feels like they're just watching a movie. And it's also painfully annoying that this game takes all of your guns away after every single cutscene. I thought my game bugged out for a second, but no. For some reason they take all of your guns away, which is the dumbest thing in the world to do. And I know this is very nitpicky, but even the cutscenes don't even look like particularly state of the art. They added this weird light effect that gives me a headache sitting through. I don't understand the point of adding this in the game. And not only is this in the cutscenes, but it's even included in the actual gameplay, which I'm not trying to sound like a complainer, but they don't look good. But okay, now that I got most of my bitching of this game out the way, let's move over to this game narratively, the writing, story, and the characters. And man oh man, where do I even begin? Now, considering Max Payne 3 was developed by Rockstar instead of Remedy, as a whole the game just feels different, and characters like Max Payne feel like completely different characters. I'll give you an example. The humor. Max in the first two games always had a sarcastic demeanor when he spoke.
I went for the hotel first. It was a sad old thing with flickering lamps and faded colors, cheap mobster punks and tired-eyed prostitutes. Just when you thought you had reached the deepest depths of horror, it suddenly got worse. Right. And here I was thinking conspiracy theories had gone out of style. Prince didn't kiss her to wake her up. No one who slept for 100 years is likely to wake up.
As you can see, he doesn't really swear a whole lot, which there's nothing wrong with swearing, but if you try to force it in too much when it doesn't need to be in place, it's gonna sound very bizarre. And that's kind of the issue that Max Payne 3 had. We all know that Rockstar has their own type of humor, which features a lot of swearing and a lot of dark ratchet humor. And on paper, having Dan Houser, who's responsible for writing some of the best games ever, sounds really good. But the problem is, just because Dan Houser is good at writing games like GTA, doesn't mean he's gonna nail a specific style that's gonna suit well for a different game. Rockstar's type of humor didn't exactly transition smoothly into Max Payne 3. Just take a listen.
And you call yourself a bodyguard, then you know you're a loser. Who needs a Trojan horse when the alarm is down and your standing army is a dame, a dork, and a drunk? They weren't there for me, as far as I could tell. And I blundered my way into enough clusterfucks for one day.
Like, you can really tell that Rockstar is trying to like really force it into Max when it sounds really weird, and it just doesn't sound natural. I went back and watched all of the Max Payne 3 and Max Payne 1 cutscenes to try and compare the two, and the difference is just night and day. And I was thinking that there was a possibility that it has to do with Max Payne changing as a person. I mean, we all know that Max Payne became an alcoholic between 1 and 2 and got really addicted to painkillers because, you know, his wife died, which drove him into a deep depression, which could be a possibility, but to me, I think it's because of how Rockstar wrote him as a person. Another aspect that I don't really vibe with is how they wrote Max Payne. They depict Max Payne as this drunken bastard who's an alcoholic, which, you know, that's cool. I mean, right when the game starts, the opening cutscene is Max Payne drinking alcohol as a damaged man who lost everything. But because they portray his entire character as an alcoholic, it feels really weird playing as him sometimes. In the first 2 games, Remedy did have him as an alcoholic, but it was very subtle and wasn't so blatantly every 10 seconds that, hey, he's an alcoholic drinking himself to death. Also, with having a protagonist who's an alcoholic, it makes them have no common sense. Like, there's so many times where Max won't notice any red flags and will just blindly walk into an ambush unknowingly, making for these really cliche and just dumb moments. And I know some people are gonna say, well, I mean, this is what 9 years of drinking does to a man. Guys, with all of the shit that Max has been through throughout the 2 games, it's not really a feasible reason for why he's the way he is in this game. And the thing is, after every single mission, when Max narrates, he always says why his decision wasn't a smart thing to do, but he continues to do it throughout the game. A big example of this is when Max shaves his hair off to go to Brazil as undercover, and he goes to like one of the worst areas of Brazil while he's hungover, and on top of that, he's wearing this bright ass shirt that signifies that he's a tourist and he's from America. And he just aimlessly wanders around with no direction in mind. And what do you know, he finds himself in a bunch of BS while he's there. Like when I got to chapter 9, which is when Max rescues Giovanna, I was just checked out of the game and wanted it to end. It just drags and feels like such a slog to progress through. I'm sure you've heard this before. I don't particularly hate Max Payne 3. It's a pretty decent game, but as a sequel, as a direct sequel to Max Payne 2, it's not really that good. Max feels like a completely different character, and the entire vibe of the game and its humor is such a radical departure. However, because I realized that I haven't been saying any good things about this game so far, one of the biggest redeeming factors of Max Payne 3 is its multiplayer. Now, believe it or not, Max Payne 3's budget is higher than GTA 4 and Red Dead Redemption. And Rockstar knew with a game this ambitious and expensive, they needed to have incentives for the player after they beat the game. Because it's not like Max Payne 3 is, you know, a super long game, it's a really short game. On the surface, Max Payne 3's multiplayer looks like any multiplayer game from the 2000s. It has the typical lobby, map voting, XP game add-ons, attachments, basically Call of Duty in third person. But when I jumped into multiplayer, I was very surprised that the servers are still active. The servers are still packed with hardcore players trying to keep their kill streaks alive. Of course, as a newbie, I died to them every single time, but to be fair, there are so many hackers and cheaters. The matchmaking is some of the worst I've seen in a third-person shooter game, and the game is buggy as hell. But when it is working fine and there's not a bunch of BS, I think it's safe to say that Max Payne 3's multiplayer in 2024 is pretty freaking awesome. Multiplayer has multiple modes ranging from team deathmatch to gang wars, and it was really fun playing Max Payne 3 against other players, because in the normal campaign, all of the enemies are designed to be in one big area, where they never do anything crazy like dodging bullets, running away, or being out of range. They're all in one area to make it easy as possible for the player to kill. Multiplayer gives you that challenge where actual human opponents are super unpredictable, so instead of being able to walk into a room full of enemies and be able to take them out one by one with bullet time, I would have to hold down LB and spread my weapon at players. And these unpredictable encounters, for me at least, are way more fun than the brain dead NPCs in the campaign. It makes the game more competitive and actually hard, but in a fun way. But still, there are a few things that hold online back, like the shitty matchmaking, which makes the game completely lopsided for new players. You can be like a level 2, and you're in a game with people who have grinded all the way to level 50 and got the best gear in the game. I feel like if you want to truly have fun in online and just play casually, just play with a couple friends in a private lobby where you're all around the same rank. So you might be wondering, do I hate this game? Yes. No. When you play by this game's rules, it really shines and is really fun. The new euphoric physics makes the game feel seamless and so good when you're doing shoot dodges and just firing your weapon at enemies. But the team just makes so many sacrifices for immersion that really is inconsistent half the time when I play the game. They want your complete undivided attention to watch these long drawn out cutscenes every 10 seconds that take so much control away from the player, creating it into a passive experience. They want you to sit and watch all these action shots and see all of the resources and hard work that they put into the game, which is cool and I appreciate that very much, but that's not gonna keep players for long term. People are gonna play the game once, and after they finish it, they're just gonna put it down and never touch it again. Luckily, this game's multiplayer saves that, thankfully, but the team just really drops the ball a lot in the campaign to make it as cinematic as possible, which results in them doing way too much than they needed to do. But with that being said, because my camera is literally about to die, thank you for watching to the end of this video. Thank you so much for supporting, watching, liking, sharing. It really helps the channel out a lot, and I'll see you guys in my next video. See ya.